Today's video will list our opinions regarding the new runes that have been datamined. Currently we think that only the belt and the boot runes will be available in phase 2, with the other slots coming in the later phases, but you honestly never know. As always, any of this is subject to change by the developers and at any time. Now, moving on. Starting off with the belt runes, there are some real clear winners here. Shadow and Flame at first glance in this category seems like a go-to for pretty much any specialization that can crit relatively reliably, giving you a 10% damage increase to your fire and shadow spells for 10 seconds when you critically strike. Invocation also seems to have some minor play for PvP builds or in leveling until a certain head rune is released that we will be taking a look at later in the video. Grimoire of Synergy seems unlikely to really see a ton of play in our opinion out of all three, since the proc itself is for the other part of you, meaning that if you crit, your pet is the one that gets the 5% damage bonus, and if your pet crits, that's when you get the 5% damage bonus. Seems honestly like a worse version of Shadow and Flame, when Shadow and Flame gives you 10% damage increase to yourself when you critically strike. Now, moving on to the boot runes. Much like the belt runes, there seems to be a very clear winner at first glance. Demonic Knowledge works extremely well for any Warlock specialization that doesn't center around sacrificing your pet, and honestly will probably push out the age-old Succubus Sacrifice Shadow Bolt spam build of the original vanilla raiding scene off the top spec spot, replacing it instead with some sort of fire-based DPS build. Dance of the Wicked could also be useful if you need extra mitigation, but proc-based mitigation isn't reliable and would only be used in extremely niche situations. Similarly, Shadow Flame has some PvP potential and could be possibly used in place of Demonic Knowledge with a fire-based build, allowing you to stack extra conflag charges for maximum damage and for the Backdraft rune, which is a helmet rune we will be going over later. Another short section, unfortunately, but the two I think will see the most use from people would be either Demonic Knowledge or Shadow Flame. Bracers are the first slot where there's some serious debate about what to use. Immolation Aura seems really intense at first glance and could be a real game changer for both tanks and DPS specializations. Like in Wrath of the Lich King, many top Demology parses used that version of Immolation Aura in that era of the game to get extra damage by standing in melee with it on while casting. Something similar here could easily add extra damage in certain fights where it's safe to go into melee range, especially combined with all the other stuff that we have that buffs fire damage, like Incinerate, etc. And as a bonus, it seems that we can have the aura turned on while we have mana, versus in Wrath of the Lich King only being able to use it on cooldown during the Metamorphosis cooldown. Belgard will also see a lot of play in PvP based builds, including one we've been kind of featuring on this channel, the Metamorphosis Master Demonologist Life Drain build. Belgard though would add some great options to that build, allowing you to get some resist and damage instead of just pure resist from the Fell Hunter or pure physical damage reduction from the Voidwalker. You'd even gain a stun that can be reliably used against all classes via the Felguard's charge if you micromanage your pet correctly. However, that does trade off some of the other benefits from the other pets, like Dispel and Stealth Detection from the Fell Hunter or Sacrifice for the Voidwalker. You definitely have lots of options to choose from for your personal style. For PvE though, Felguard could also see some use, especially for the Demonic Pact based specializations, as the strongest pet giving the highest amount of spell power gain from Demonic Knowledge. Finally, Affliction-based playstyles will get Unstable Affliction, making it even riskier to dispel dots in PvP, and possibly provide a nice level scaling damage rune ability for Affliction PvE. It will be especially nasty when combined with the Pandemic rune we are about to go over in the next section. Oh boy, do you have a choice to make here. Both of these runes are crazy stupid strong and will lend themselves to many playstyles in PvE and PvP. It's hard to argue exactly which one is better, but if I had to choose, I believe the Backdraft fire-based builds will pull ahead in PvE compared to Pandemic-based builds, simply because the 30% spellcasting haste is an insane bonus, and then you have other things like niche situations where Shadow Flame will allow you to basically keep it up permanently by allowing you to stack extra conflag charges. But also, it will work against you in that kind of situations if you're unable to get into the melee range to work the Shadow Flame into your rotation. In a more general way though, it also complements Demonic Knowledge really well, giving you a good amount of spell power when your pet is out to make those faster casted spells you get hit even harder. That isn't to say Pandemic will see no play. For builds obviously that don't use conflag, this is your only rune choice for your helmet. However, that just means you'll have more chances to proc the 10% damage buff from Shadow and Flame on your belt, since each tick has a chance to crit now, and you'll probably be keeping up a couple dots for the extra damage in both PvE and PvP. PvP wise, these runes are both insane as well and will work into many different builds as a nice frosting on top of the base specialization cake. These were some theory crafted builds I've been thinking about for the level 60 cap. It's very possible things may change, but at least these are some ideas I have based on what we've seen so far. For a fire DPS spec, you'd want to take Backdraft, Immolation Aura, Shadow and Flame, Demonic Knowledge, Chaos Bolt, Incinerate, and Lake of Fire for your rune choices. The main idea behind this build is simply just to sit in melee range with Immolation Aura going, doing your normal fire-based rotation. So something like rank 1 Rain of Fire into Incinerate, into Immolation Aura, into Immolate, followed instantly by using that charge for Conflag for the speed boost to your spells, to Chaos Bolt, and then filling with Incinerate, rank 1 Rain of Fire as your cooldowns refresh. Life tapping and also doing aura management as needed. It has a lot of damage potential, and the spec takes basically all the good fire talents in destruction while picking up the pet stat boosting talents in demonology to get extra spell power from demonic knowledge. Ideally, you'd be using the imp for this, and the build will take a DPS hit if you can't use the immolation aura to damage things, but in those situations it may be worth it temporarily switching to a Felguard instead of using the immolation aura. Also, given the recent stripping of immunities in the new raid Nomorangan being released, that gives me a strong suspicion they will also do the same to like Molten Core and BWL for the fire immunities. Our next spec is a tank life drain threat. Basically, the idea behind this is use Pandemic, Immolation Aura, Shadow and Flame, Demonic Knowledge, Metamorphosis, and this is where the player choice comes from, which we will cover here in a second, Demonic Pack, or Incinerate, or Everlasting Affliction. And then lastly, Master Channeler. This is a pretty flexible tanking build, entirely based on the choice you go with of the leg rune. Depending on if your raid has a dedicated Demonic Pact Warlock or not, you can fill the role with minimal DPS loss and no real respecialization needing, allowing your raid casters, including yourself, to gain lots of healing and damage. Similar, if you prefer more raw personal DPS, Incinerate would be the go-to choice. However, if you're worried about AoE threat, dots will still be our only main way of long-range generation of aggro on lots of mobs. No, it isn't an instant threat generation like Searing Pain, but casting Corruption and Curse of Agony and then tab targeting Searing Pain to refresh the corruption has really helped me maintain AoE threat in BFD, and will probably be used as my main strategy if AoE tanking is needed in Nomer. If Immolation isn't in Phase 2 though, we will definitely have only the dots and Searing Pain tab targeting to AoE tank. Otherwise, the life drain should work on most bosses except mechanical ones, and this is more of an in-game focused build though than specifically a build to take into Nomer, so if that does happen at like max level 60, just switching to Lake of Fire Demonic Tactics isn't that big of a deal. And lastly, we do have a small overview of the PvP build we had mentioned earlier. It starts off with Pandemic, Felguard, Shadow and Flame, Demonic Knowledge, Metamorphosis, Everlasting Affliction, and Master Channeler. This one though we'll go over more in depth in its own video once we have a little bit more concrete information, but a lot of our theories so far have come true regarding it, and to be fair, some of the others we had didn't. And especially regarding the way the developers have been shaping SOD up in terms of how stuff will work and what abilities are going to be included. Because of that, this build just keeps looking stronger and stronger, allowing you to really outlast your opponents and if need be, custom pick the best pet for the situation. I'm extremely excited to make this a video in the future and see how well this will fare at level 60. In closing, those were our thoughts on the runes and potential builds we'd start from based on the new rune information we've researched in the data mine. As always, if you liked the video, why not throw some algorithm love by subbing and liking and maybe leaving a comment. Take it easy and hopefully see you in Phase 2.